let's wrap up our world population unit with some population prediction problems. That's right, now that we've learned all these great models and theories, let's throw a big monkey wrench into all of it, because there are some things which mess up this tidy, nice, predictable stuff that we've been covering, and they're important enough to understand so you get what's happening in the world. Problem one is compounding peoples making compounding problems. And this is something we've referenced many times in the past. I'll go over it one more time. That is, population growth rate, when fertility rates are high, is exponential. It's not mathematical. So when you're over that 2.1 replacement level, if the fertility rate is 3, 4, 5, or 6, or 8, the population is growing not 1,000 people every year. That was the birth rate, where you would add a certain number of people every year. But it's not like you're adding 1,000 this year and 1,000 next year and 1,000 a generation after that. It's much more exponential. That is that you may add 1 million people in this generation, and then when that 1 million people gets to be bearing age, they're going to have 10 million babies, not 1 million. And then when those 10 million babies grow up and have babies, they're going to have 100 million babies. So this increases the population size very rapidly with high fertility rates. And fertility rates are the most important measure of what's going on here, and for you to understand, to be able to predict the future. An example, let's look at fertility over a generation in several different countries so you can see how this is magnified over time. Let's pick on Japan, India, Uganda. Japan's fertility rate is 1. The average woman has 1 kid. In India, the average woman has 3. In Uganda, the average woman has 8. Whew, getting busy. Now, over time, let's look at a generation, a family in each one of these societies. In Japan, we have grandma who had 1 kid. 1 kid plus 1 kid, all right? And her 1 kid had 1 kid. So that's 3 people in total in Japan over the course of 1 generation. In India, 1 woman has 3 kids. And those 3 kids go and have 3 kids. That's 9 grandkids for grandma. Over time, in 1 generation, you have 13 members of this single family. So you see already, wow, okay, India's growing a lot faster than negative Japan. Japan only had 3. India's got 13 new people just because of this 1 woman. Now to go to Uganda and see how exponential growth really unfolds. 1 woman in Uganda, 1, will have 8 kids. Whew. And those 8 kids will then go have 8 kids. That's 64 grandkids for grandma who started this whole mess a-rolling. You dig what I'm saying now? So 1 generation in Uganda is 73 people, all from 1 woman, from every woman in Ugandan society. And you know what? Play it 1 forward to great-grandkids there in Uganda. You see that 512 great-grandchildren would come from this 1 woman. That's exponential growth rate, and that is why fertility rates are such an important measure of what's going on in the world. Take a look at this world fertility rate map in order to make some solid predictions of the future. We talked in an earlier part of this lecture that the world overall population is growing, and we'll add another 1 billion people by 2020 and probably about another 1 billion every decade or so after that. Now, where is this growth going to occur? The fertility rate map answers those questions for you. Of course, some easy patterns of note. The rich, fully developed countries have stable growth rates. 2.1, 2.2, or 1.9. Places like North America, Europe, Russia, even China, Australia, big parts of South America. The population growths are not increasing very quickly here because the fertility rates are right there at that 2 level. So where is huge growth going to occur? Look at the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, lit up in the yellows and orange and red colors. Fertility rates of 4, 5, 6 kids on average per woman. That is where the explosive growth is going to occur. And there are some places that are a little bit in between. Mexico, Central America, some parts of Latin America, even India there in South Asia. Yes, they're not stable. They're not 2.1 replacement level fertility. They're more like 2.5 to 3.5, which means they're growing too, just not as fast as the African continent and parts of the Middle East. Now, issue 2, people move. The other thing which complicates our nice, tidy prediction of the demographic transition is that not everybody stays in their little state as it's evolving. People ain't trees and rocks. They're not stuck in a place. And oftentimes, if they don't like the place they're in for various reasons, they will get up and leave. We call that emigration. If you're in a state and you're emigrating or exiting out of it, that's emigration with an E. E for immigration, E for exit. If people are moving into your state, they're immigrating in. Immigration with an I. Into, also with an I. Now, why would people immigrate? the primary motivation of migration worldwide is economic. That people are in a state that does not have enough stuff for them, so they're going to go to a state that has more stuff. What stuff? Well, perhaps not enough food, perhaps not enough clean water, perhaps not enough government services, perhaps not enough jobs. And so people are going to get up and say, this place sucks. I'm going to go to some place with more stuff. Economic based. Here's a net migration rate map for the entire world. Those countries in orange are places where people are getting up and leaving. Places in blue are where they're going to, that have positive migration over the course of that year. Again, some obvious patterns of note. The rich places on planet Earth, the fully developed countries, are the natural tendency locations that people want to move to. So people are going to leave Africa or maybe parts of Latin America or parts of Asia and move to the richer countries where stuff's going on and perhaps there's more economic opportunity. However, there's also interregional migration as well. If you look in Africa, you see that Nigeria is lit up as positive migration. Nigeria is a very big economy and very hustling, bustling, lots of oil jobs there. So within the region, a lot of people in Africa move to Nigeria for economic reasons. And we'll pop over to India and Pakistan, we referenced in an earlier lecture as well. Lots of folks from those countries go to the UAE and Kuwait and Oman to work in the oil industry. And you see those Middle Eastern Gulf countries are also positive blue for immigration. So that explains some of that. And again, mostly people move for economic reasons. However, there are a class of people that move not for economics, not for money, not for stuff, not for jobs. They move primarily because if they don't move from their country, they're going to die. And we call those folks refugees. And I do want you to understand the difference between an immigrant, mostly economic, and a refugee, which is mostly political or life-threatening. So refugees are folks, and this is a classified status from the United Nations that countries kind of agree to. This isn't just that, hey, I want to call myself a refugee. No, there has to be reasons that you call yourself a refugee, and the world accepts those reasons or don't. And then they'll help you resettle in other countries. Mainly, it's the life or limb thing. If I stay in this country, I'm going to die. Someone will shoot me, someone will kill me, or the government will persecute me or prosecute me or jail me or torture me for my political beliefs. So it's mostly political based. Most of the refugees in the world are because of active wars. Obviously, if there's a war going on in your country, you want to get the hell out of the way. So lots of refugees out of Iraq, out of Afghanistan. There used to be a lot of refugees out of Vietnam during the Vietnam War. You can kind of go around the planet and see where are active wars, and there's people getting the hell out of those zones, going to other countries. There's also political repression as well, though, in states that are extremely repressive and don't allow for, say, democratic means or people being outspoken or no freedoms of the press. People do get persecuted. So in military juntas or military dictatorships or outright dictatorships around the world, people who escape from those places largely are granted refugee status because if they go back, the government will kill them. So just a quick rundown of refugee status, major places the refugees are from in the last several years. Again, Afghanistan, Sudan, another civil war, active war zone, Burundi, the Congo, Somalia, Vietnam, Iraq, Palestine, Burma. All of these places people need to leave or they will die and or be punished. So that puts a kink into the whole demographic transition. What about forces that completely defy the demographic transition in their entirety? There are those things that are working in a society that don't care if you're going from stage 2 to stage 3. They're going to continue to motivate people to have large families and big fertility rates. Things like what? Well, religion's a big one. Culture in general is very powerful. And there are those cultures around the world that simply prize big family size, that it's a sign of wealth or virility. Yes, I can have lots of kids. So there's this tremendous importance attached to having a big family. And those folks, they don't care if they're in a rich country or poor country, a developed or undeveloped stage 2 or stage 3. They couldn't care less. That remains the same. Specifically religion, though. There are those religions out there that really prize large family size and promote large family size independent of any sort of transition action that's going on. I'll pick on a few by name. Catholics, you know this already. Catholicism heavily promotes big family size, and on top of that, they don't want their constituents to use birth control. So obviously, you're going to have in any society, whether it's rich or poor, big Catholic families. Mormons in the same boat. Mormonism perpetuates and really focuses on have huge families. So it doesn't matter if the country's rich or poor. In fact, almost all the Mormons are located in the richest country on earth, the United States. And they don't care about no transition. They care more about family size. It supersedes this whole idea of the transition. I'll also throw in Islam. If you look at Islamic countries around the world, worlds where that religion predominates, you will also see very big family size, again, perpetuated by the culture of the religion, regardless of the status of the state. And I'll pick on, again, our Gulf Coast states like Kuwait, UAE. Family size is very big there, and they're exceptionally rich societies. They're fully developed. But people don't care. They're going to have big families anyway. That's just what they do. So cultural forces are very big, but there's also another thing that's kind of cultural, and that is government policy. Government policies within certain states can heavily manipulate or affect the fertility rate and therefore the birth rate and therefore the population growth rate. As mentioned earlier, there are some governments that worry that their population is growing way too fast, and so they're going to implement some sort of device or policy which is going to reel that back in or pull it in. Namely, China. We already talked about that. The one-child policy. China looked around and said, hey, we're growing too fast, and we are going to have way too many people, and we will not have enough resources or enough stuff or enough jobs for these people at current growth rates, so let's implement this policy which reels it back and affects that fertility rate and therefore the growth rate artificially. Okay, that didn't happen naturally, and it wasn't part of the demographic transition, but it wildly did affect things. Lots of other states in sub-Saharan Africa and other poorer, lesser developed parts of the world also worry a lot about their exploding birth rates because they already don't have enough stuff. Perhaps they don't have enough resources or enough jobs now. So what's going to happen when the population doubles? So they may implement policies to try to reel things in. However, the inverse holds true. The other side of the spectrum was those countries where population is actually shrinking or declining. And these governments are very worried, maybe more worried than the explosive growth governments. That is places like Japan, Italy, Russia. They are losing population every year. And a lot of people may say, hey, well, isn't that great? Isn't that cool? I mean, isn't the world overpopulated? Isn't it awesome that there would be countries where the population is getting smaller? That's a really good thing. The governments of those places don't think so because remember those bearing brackets? You need people to be working the jobs in your economy to make it bigger, to make you worth more money, to pay taxes, to have kids that are the future generations of workers and taxpayers and military strength and cultural strength and everything else. And in countries where the population is shrinking, governments are looking around going, holy crap, what are we going to do? We're getting smaller and we're basically losing our edge and we're not going to be able to continue to grow economically if our population continues to dwindle. We got to get people in here to fulfill these jobs, which by the way is why immigration sometimes is allowed. As an ironic side note here, in the countries I just mentioned, Japan, Italy, Russia, all these are places with negative growth rates, very low fertility rates. And all of these countries also, the people in these countries do not like the idea of immigration. They're very culturally proud and protective. So the governments of these places are in a pickle, man, because their citizens are not having children. And at the same time, their citizens don't want to allow immigration. So the governments are like, well, crap, dudes, something's got to give here. What are we supposed to do? And those governments are trying their damnedest to implement policies which will encourage people to have kids, encourage an increase in the fertility rate, or at least soften the whole concept of immigration. In Japan, they had a go home from work and have sex day, basically. Go home, people. Have babies. The Pope came out in Italy about a decade ago in a national televised address and said, please, Italians, go home and have kids. It is quite important to a society to keep perpetuating itself. So government policies can manipulate things one way or the other. And for those of you that think that your government doesn't do it, trust me, the U.S. government does this too. The U.S. government wants the population to continue to grow, albeit stably, to continue to increase the economy and everything else and the tax base. So they give incentives for people to have kids. They're called tax breaks, and lots of countries do this. So you are actually a little write-off for your parents. The U.S. government gives them a tax break for having you, and if they have more than just you, they get a double tax break. So that's incentive for people to have more kids. All governments have some sort of policies on this, whether it's to prevent it or encourage it. It does radically throw a monkey wrench into the whole idea of the demographic transition working kind of on its own. The last kind of cultural thing that might affect the demographic transition is chronic disease, within a society, natural disasters or wars, which can take out whole segments of the population. Now, the wars and natural disasters take a big chunk out of the population immediately. With wars, it's typically men aged 20 to 40. And say in Nazi Germany or Japanese during its imperial period, really big sections of their 20 to 40-year-old population base just got wiped out during wartime era. And that does affect the population growth rate of the future. This actually applies more in the modern era in terms of chronic disease. Lots of places in sub-Saharan Africa have endemic AIDS, which affects babies, it affects old people, it affects the bearing class, it affects everybody, and this really significantly impacts what's happened demographically, regardless of what transition they're in. It doesn't matter if they're stage 1 or stage 15 and a half. When you have endemic disease, it pulls down longevity rates, it puts up infant mortality rates, so it kind of messes up all this prediction process. Finally, is it even possible for the transition to occur everywhere on planet Earth? Many people would argue no. I mean, is it possible that the entire planet becomes fully developed and fully rich and hardly anybody's in agriculture and everybody lives in a city? And, well, maybe not. Somebody's got to grow the food. No matter what, it seems like there's going to be poorer parts of the planet than richer parts of the planet. So many would argue the whole transition theory is bunk from the get-go. That not every country on planet Earth can possibly undergo the same evolution that America and Western Europe did, and therefore this is all null and void. And that's a perfectly respectable opinion. I still think it works enough to understand what's going on in today's world. The whole concepts, though, of developed or underdeveloped or developing, the transition itself, overpopulated or underpopulated, these are all relative terms, which the rich, developed world created. I mean, they're the ones that invented the model and invented these terms. And what does overpopulation mean? Is it the same? Is it a number? No, it's relative. It's dependent upon the society. And then the society is going to decide what to do from that point. Are they going to transition this way? Or maybe they're going to transition back to another way. This is all up for debate in today's society. So don't take everything for granted. Do understand these monkey wrenches thrown into the machine that predicts these things. And you can then understand case to case what's going to happen in different parts of the world. Let's end on that note, but check out these population videos. In fact, I'll call them population propaganda videos, a couple of short videos in which the people who have made the video are trying to impart a point to you via the whole demographic transition model. Watch these videos, make sure you understand the terminology of what they're talking about, pinpoint what it is they're trying to convince you of, and maybe find some faults in their logic. See what you think.